the right grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup after the former manner, which when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh. For I indeed was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrew, and there also I have done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. So we find that Joseph being here in this state that he was in. You know, and one of the things interesting about Joseph that we talked about, God blessed him even there in that prison, didn't he? Because, he was head of the prison, wasn't he? You know, that's kind of like saying, he was running the place, wasn't he? It's kind of amazing, isn't it? And so we find that this butler had this dream, and Joseph did interpret it, and basically what it meant was in 3 days you're going to be put back into power. One of the things about the interpretation of these dreams, you find that very often the lessons are taught kind of one-sided on it, meaning it talks about all the good things that come out of these dreams. But God doesn't work that way, does he? He also lets you know the other side of the coin, doesn't he? And so it is with the chief baker. The other side of the coin is going to be seen. And it's kind of interesting, Joseph recognized that the state he was in, that all this had befallen him, and he said, I've done nothing, they should put me in this dungeon. And he told the truth. He told the truth. And how would that weigh on us to be cast into the jail that haven't done that? That would kind of weigh heavy on us. What would our response and what would our reaction be, when if something like that happened to us? And one of the things, too, we notice Joseph had compassion upon the prisoners that were around about him. You say, well, how do you know that? Notice what it says here in verse 7. Verse 6, and Joseph came unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad, talking about the baker and the butler. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that was with him in the ward of the Lord's house, saying, wherefore look ye so sadly today? So Joseph could see there was something troubling and bothering them. Now, if you stop and think about it, maybe from our standpoint, probably being in jail or in prison, the last thought in our minds would be the fate of somebody else, wouldn't it? I mean, realistically, just think about it. We'd be more concerned about how getting out of there and how we're going to get out of this situation, and especially having done nothing. And, most of the time things like this do what? Makes one bitter, doesn't it? There's a lot of lessons in this. But see, in order for God to bless Joseph, Joseph had to do his part. Even though he was wrong, you don't see anywhere where he lashed out. You didn't see where he lashed out against Potiphar. You don't see where he's lashed out here in this prison. Part of it has to do with the fact that we're going to see that God is using these events because there was something a whole lot bigger for Joseph to do. And that was to be prime minister. He was going to be the number 2 man in charge. This is what God was preparing him for. Joseph's thought, his mannerism, his communication ability and everything had to be refined and nurtured to a point to where he could perform this. I mean, that wasn't going to be an easy task. It wasn't for the weak of heart. It wasn't for the faint of mind. It was going to take somebody strong to bring this about. And of course, we know the old saying, Jeff, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right? And in a lot of ways, Jeremy, that seems to be true, doesn't it? It sure does. That which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I can say that seems to be true. You know what events and things has happened in your life that you can say that's probably what it was. It made us stronger, didn't it? It sure did. And so we find that these things happened within 3 days. And then we get to the chief baker, and that's kind of where we're supposed to pick up. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph. And that's an interesting statement right here. One of the things that we go learn, of course, it's not here, but as we get over into the book of Deuteronomy, if we decide to continue on in the Old Testament, which I do plan to continue on after we finish this, to go right on into Exodus, okay? What was a sign that a prophet was a true prophet of God, or that an interpreter of dreams was a true interpreter of dreams and not a false prophet or some type of magician? What was the sign of it? It came true. You know. And we find that there were a lot of people that claimed they had dreams of God doing this and God doing, it didn't come true. You know. And Moses gives a stern warning about listening to those people. As a matter of fact, he recommends they be put to death. You know, that a prophet, says something that doesn't come about, and guess what? It ain't from God, is it? It may be from him or from the devil, but it's not from God. So that's one of the things that's interesting about here. The chief baker saw the interpretation was good. It came about, didn't it? Sure is. He could see some events that were transpiring here that would, this is going to happen. So let me go to Joseph and find out about my dream. Let's see what he's going to say about my dream. When the chief baker saw the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. So we find that what Joseph is saying here, within the next 3 days, this is going to happen. It's not going to be 3 years or 30 years. It's going to happen pretty soon. What's going to happen is going to happen within the next 3 days. Yet within that 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off the... Whoops. Boy, what an interpretation. The baker probably wasn't expecting that, was he? He could see the dream that the butler had, and man, all these good things are going to happen. He's going to be restored back into prominence and all these things. And probably some things were already going around the edges that probably ought to start seeing this happening. But when it came to the chief baker, now we got a bad interpretation of a dream happening. So all the dreams and things from God that was used at this time were not always good, were they? We're going to find that with the Old Testament prophets, the word that was revealed unto them, you're going to find the bulk of it was condemnation, wasn't it? These prophets said, God spoke to me and said, hey, you need to clean your act up. The Chaldeans are going to come down here. You're going to be taken off into captivity. Not a very pleasant thought, is it? And a lot of times that was the rub with the prophets and the people, wasn't it? They didn't want to hear that, did they? They wanted to hear how they were going to be restored to their greatness, how they were going to be a victorious army, how all the grapes were going to just prosper and bloom, and those types of things. They wanted smooth things, didn't they? Well, a lot of times you don't get smooth things, do you? One of the questions that you have to ask yourself, what was the butler and baker doing in cast into prison anyway? It really doesn't say here what they were doing there, but there was something that made Pharaoh uneasy about them. Now, when you go and look at this from a historical standpoint and see what some of the historians have to say about it, because of the climate at this time, and we're going to see that climate come into play in Exodus chapter 1 when we get there, there was a large turnover of pharaohs at this time, okay? A lot of pharaohs didn't rule very long. It was kind of like as you get down to the latter end of the Roman Empire, or you get into the major players of the Roman Empire, a lot of them, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar, they didn't rule very long, did they? And that seemed to be the climate that's going on here. So the thought pattern, when they look at it from what's known about Egyptian history, is there was a lot of turnover in the Pharaoh line, meaning there was a lot of executions and upsets going on. So the thought pattern here is that what better way to attack a Pharaoh or to kill a Pharaoh than to get to his butler or his chief baker? What do they control? The food source, what you eat and drink. So if you could get to them and get some poison put in there somewhere, then you stand a pretty good chance of being the next Pharaoh, right? And that's just a thought on it. There was something, though, that we know that made this Pharaoh uneasy with this butler and this baker, okay? What it was, the Bible doesn't really say, so I had to step out of the biblical context of it into the historical setting of it, okay? And that's what is often said. So anyway, he said, in 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. Well, that's not a very pretty sight, is it? So undoubtedly, something had gone on more deeply with the baker than it had with the butler, because the baker was going to be hanged and he was going to be killed. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday of all things, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler, but he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hands. But notice what happened here. But he hanged the chief baker. So Joseph had interpreted to them. So what did this make Joseph's dream? His interpretation. Made it good, didn't it? It made it good. It sure did. What we're going to run into when we get into chapter 41 is we know that Pharaoh is going to have a dream. And the butler, and we didn't talk too much about that yet, but the butler is going to remember Joseph about 2 years from the point of all this happens, when Pharaoh has this dream about the fat cattle and the skinny cattle. And one of the things that we realize is that Pharaoh first went to his magicians and soothsayers to interpret that dream, didn't he? And they couldn't do it. The butler remembered Joseph, and Joseph could do it. And let's see in Genesis chapter 40 and verse 8. Notice what Joseph said about the interpretation of dreams when he was asked about it, about the baker and the butler. And they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me then, I pray you. Joseph said that the interpretation of these dreams belonged to who? To God. Joseph's faith was such in God, he believed that he could interpret those dreams, because he knew about the God of heaven. Now you got to remember, this chief baker and chief butler and these pharaohs and all, they were from a different cultural standpoint than the Hebrew. You know, the Hebrews had the true God of heaven on their side, and these people here were heathen in nature. They worshiped all kind of idols and gods and snakes and serpents and all this kind of stuff. So when Joseph said that, he said the true interpretation of dreams belongs to who? Man or God? Belongs to God. And so we find this is going to come true over here when we get into chapter 41 here in just a minute. I've been talking down into nothing. Didn't you, brethren, have anything you want to? Go ahead, Brother Tom.
I think we might ought to point out here at this point, seeing that there were both was chief officers under Pharaoh, one's a butler and the other's a baker. Mm-hmm. And we see the difference. But the butler was restored to his old job, and the baker was hanged. And now the way I understand that is because it has all to do with the sin that they had committed.
Right.
Because in Deuteronomy, I think you might have mentioned that a while ago. In there, you know, the king, I can't quite get it straight, but anyway, there might have been in Nehemiah. Nehemiah got something in it about that too, but about interpreting dreams.
Right, interpreting dreams, right.
The way the Lord answered him was, if he committed a sin worthy of death, then to hang him on a tree.
Right.
Now that's where it comes from. I think it's out of Deuteronomy. Hang him on a tree.
Yeah. And that was
so in my mind and my thoughts now, I'm saying they both committed sin and got in prison.
Right.
But the baker's sin was worthy of death, while the butler's probably was not.
Right, exactly. And that's what we were kind of talking about, what historians tell us about this thing. We don't really know for sure, but it was something that made Pharaoh uncomfortable, didn't it? That sin or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Now, another thought goes along in there with it, ties in with the thought that God is no respecter of persons.
Right.
You know, whatever a man is,
Right.
whatever he's due to get for whatever is going on, God's going to make sure he renders unto him accordingly. We find that in Romans, you know, when we study in Romans. God shall render unto every man according to his deeds.
Right. And do we see a shadow here too? You know, we talk about types and shadows in this thing, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay, now, 3 days. What do we read 3 days again to find that something's true? In the life of Jesus, don't we?
Yeah.
They thought they had it.
Yeah.
3 days later, guess what? He's resurrected. So shortly, who he was and the things that he taught came about, didn't it?
That tells you some importance on the number 3. Number 3.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of importance.
A lot of importance. And
God the Father, and God the Son, God the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Complete and fullness. And you know, that will be another lesson in itself, biblical numerology. You know, it is kind of interested in it, about these 7s and 3s and 10s and scores. You know, so anyway, so we find too another shadow here. Joseph was acting as an intercessor, wasn't he?
Yeah.
You had the chief butler who survived and gained life. You had the chief baker that was condemned. Now think about what Brother Kahn said in lieu of the cross. Even though we know all 3 men died on the cross, but one was saved, wasn't he?
Yeah.
The butler was saved, wasn't he? Here again, that gets into what the sin was in the heart, doesn't it? The chief baker wasn't, and the other thief wasn't, was he? So more types and shadows that we see in this of things to come. And so we find, and like I say here again, there's a whole lot in this, and if we started down that line, and here again, I've said this over and over again, we would start Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 over these 2 binders that I have that's just full of notes and things and documents. Probably wouldn't be the same binders, Jeremy. Be so much more that we haven't seen that as we study this, you know. So anyway, we find that the chief butler, yet not the chief butler remembered Joseph, but forgot about him. You know, it seemed like every which way Joseph turned, no matter how much good he did and how hard he strived, seemed like it was a kick down or a let down everywhere, doesn't it? But what you have to remember, God is in this. And as we get over here into chapter 41, maybe there is a reason providentially that the chief butler didn't remember Joseph. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I think he didn't remember, maybe he forgot, but I think it wasn't time. It wasn't time.
That's what I'm going with that, yep.
He said, this guy interpreted my dream, Pharaoh would be like, okay, well, he got left.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the timing was back.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. You know, because what we're going to find here is when the chief butler remembers it, he knew where Joseph was, didn't he? What if Joseph, he had went ahead, when he got out, had a petition Pharaoh to let Joseph go? Where would Joseph been? Maybe this was God's way of saying, I'm going to keep Joseph here so the butler knows where he's at. Kind of like what you said, the timing of this thing, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, Eric, you got anything you want to, Morgan, you got anything you want to, okay. We'll kind of go on into chapter 41 then. These chapters we're moving along pretty fast and pretty rapidly, you know, and so it looks like we're going to close out Genesis, you know, long before that 10-year period we had estimated. Anyway, in chapter 41, we're going to have Pharaoh's dream come into being. And this is where Joseph is going to be remembered. We're going to see many lessons, you know, is in this here again. Maybe a few of them, you know, sometimes the good we do seems unrewarded, you know, and we talked about that, how that can make one be despondent or sad. One of the things we're going to see too is waiting is a common theme in the Bible. You know, you wait on the Lord, don't you? And that's 13 years. We talked about the 50 years of Abraham's faith to get him to that point. We talked about the 13 years here in Joseph's life. And we're going to talk about the total time in Egyptian bondage to the release of somewhere around 400 to 430 years. You know, that's a period of time that a wait, isn't it? It has to be God's way and not our way. Our way. You know, and so that brings us up that God often appoints us unto us a wait much longer than we would like. You know, now if we spend a little bit too much time in the McDonald's drive-in window, we get upset, don't we? We want that old hamburger and that French fry and that drink right at the end, don't we here? We don't want it 10 minutes from now. We want it now. So, you know, and that's the way we are. We also see that God appoints our starts and our stops. And so it is. It's kind of like what Jeremy was talking about. God's timing's in this. He appoints when it starts, and he'll appoint when it stops. And that, and we see that God's hand was in this. The butler knew exactly where to find Joseph. If he had been released earlier, who knows? You know. So all this is God's way of dealing with the events here in Joseph's life. And so we find in chapter 41, it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by a river. Remember we talked about the timeline? So from the time of these events with the baker and butler until Joseph interprets this dream is 2 years. So if you backtrack that timeline, you're going to see that Joseph now is going to be about 30 years old. Another shadow, Brother Colin. Who was 30 years old when they began the ministry? Who was 30 years old when he began his ministry? Jesus. Now here Joseph is going to start his ministry about what? 30 years old. It's amazing as you look at this, okay? And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years, not partial years, but 2 full years. So he stayed there for a while, didn't he? That Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by a river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. So now here we have Pharaoh here having a dream. And this dream, you know, starts close to a river, and we know that rivers are a source of life, isn't it? And this is something that Pharaoh could understand about rivers. That was very important. The Nile and a river and all, it's still a very important part of Egypt today, isn't it? In their prosperity, in their ability to grow food and things of that nature. In general, we know that where there's river, that was important in the raising of livestock, so you had these cattle coming about. What Pharaoh couldn't understand, though, is what does all this mean? What does this mean? You know, what's this about? And so we find the number 7 coming into play here. And that's going to be denoted of 7 years that we're going to see. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears blasted with the east wind sprang up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears, and Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So here we are again about the fat and the thin. Have you noticed one thing about the thin devouring the fat? The thin didn't gain any weight, did they? Even with the corn, there was no gain. So it's a form of destruction, isn't it? You're going to find that the thin destroyed that which was fat and healthy, didn't it? And that's going to come into the plague bag, isn't it? So the thin didn't gain anything, did they? So there's going to be some rough times coming ahead. And so we find it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream. but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Of course, we reference this back to Genesis chapter 40, verse 8, and we're not going to go back over that it belongs to God to interpret the dream. So these men didn't have the ability to interpret that dream. Now, what you have to remember, these magicians and wise men, they were the sought after group, so to speak, of that time. They were men that were educated in the realm, and of course in this particular realm, they were educated in the things of idolatry and soothsaying, performing things that were not thought capable of things of that nature, and they were the wise, they were the learned men of the time. So Pharaoh had a lot of what we would call today educated advisors. Now, you can put a big question mark behind that, because we see a lot of times, even in our society today, at what that may denote, okay? And that's another story, another lesson of the time. So anyway, they couldn't interpret it. And so we find the chief butler is going to speak up unto Pharaoh. I remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put men of ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream one night, I and he, and we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was this young man, a Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams to each man according to his dream he did interpret. So the time is being fulfilled, isn't it, when it's time now for Joseph to be remembered. And so we find he's telling Pharaoh about, well, you know, I had these faults. You put me in prison. I met this young Hebrew man that was the captain of the guard and had put in charge. And he interpreted the dreams of mine and also of the butler, above the baker. And notice what happened here in verse 13. What about them dreams? And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was, me restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. What was he telling Pharaoh? Pharaoh, if you remember at your birthday party 2 years ago, I was restored just like Joseph had told me I was going to be restored. And if you remember, you hanged the baker just like Joseph said that you were going to hang. What had the butler just done? He had confirmed that Joseph had the ability to interpret dreams. That Joseph was different than the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Because they couldn't do it. And so we find that Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. He shaved himself, changed his raiment, and came unto Pharaoh. So, you know, no doubt when you look at this being in the dungeon, which was the bottom, you could say, of the castle as we would recognize it today, being in the very pit or heart of the prison, it wasn't a very clean place, was it? But notice what Joseph did before he came to Pharaoh. Notice how, and we talked about this. We talked about this in Wednesday night in the book of Acts about how the apostles, when they spoke to the Sanhedrin, was always in a very respectful manner. They always spoke to them as father and brethren and things of that nature, not in a hostile manner, but in a professional manner. And you see this here in the life of Joseph. We find they brought him hastily out of prison. So what did Joseph do? Was he going to go into the house of the king, dirty and nasty and filthy and things of that nature? Even though he probably could have, but he needed to make himself look as respectful as he could. And that's a powerful lesson in this. As Reed said before, and I know this too, that you really want to stir up something within a congregation, go to speaking on giving and dress. Okay. Two hot button subjects, so to speak. But the principle is laid down here. What did Joseph do? And we're going to see this principle being carried over. I remember back when I was working for the Dana Corporation, and we used to go to Toledo, Ohio at the corporate office, and it was a big old huge, you can imagine, place, and all spectacular and everything, the way it was done up. And one of the things, though, that was required of when you went in there, if you went past the receptionist up into the office complex, men were required to wear a tie, and women were required to wear what they call women business attire. So I'd be bopped off up there one day on a trip up there, knowing this, didn't have a tie, didn't even think about it. Went in the lobby, went over toward the elevator, punched in my code, and the receptionist said, "Bobby, where you going?" I said, "Well, we got a meeting up here on the, whatever floor it was, third floor, fourth floor." She said, "You can't go up there." I said, "What?" She said, "You don't have a tie." I said, "What?" And it hit me about the dress code up there. She said, "Don't worry, I keep a few neckties. You'd be surprised at how you guys bebop in here and think you're just going to walk right on in here." So I had to put on a tie. No, Eric, it didn't match anything I had on, okay? But that was the dress code required. If you go to the president's office today, how would you go? Would you go just dressed up any old kind of way and all like that, or would you put on your best you had and probably put on a tie and a coat? Yeah. Jerry?
Verse 14, kind of a cultural thing. The Egyptians a lot of times shaved their body hair. It's mainly to cut down on lice. So I think he was trying to present himself where he would be accepted.
Sure. Yeah, and that's what I was. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. That's right. That's what he would do. He was making himself presentable, wasn't he? So is there a lesson in this as we come forward about when we come before our King today, should we just dress in any old manner or any old way, or should we dress in a respectable manner? I like the way you put that. I'll have to remember that in lessons. Dress in a respectable manner, right? Because Jesus is present, right? So anyway, I won't get off into that. I'll just come back over here, okay? So we dress in a respectable manner. And so he shaved himself, changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it." And look here, I done missed the first verse. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it, and I have heard say of thee, that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it." So Pharaoh now has called Joseph. Joseph has got himself respectable, and now Pharaoh is asking Joseph about this dream. And I'm going to have to stop right here, because if I don't, we're going to have to get ready for the service, for the worship service. So I'm going to reread this buzzer. I hope I don't create too much confusion. Hey, Dan, we're going to let you live that day.
We ain't supposed to say that kind of stuff in church.
So I want you to know I'm